the questions they asked about
Yeah, I am now.
what it was like, and we had a panel the very first day on different mentors and different roles.
I'm on because they want more transcripts.
Great.
So it was a lot of, it was really good.
Well, it is. I consider it.
Welcome to joining this side of the world.
Thank you. I had to celebrate. I don't know. Marty mixed it up. So I was like,
Well, yeah, I thought we was.
Oh.
Well, I thought so too, and then I saw everybody was pretty much, except Rich, was just sort of, yeah.
real close to the
Never followed.
They're still in debt. They have things to get out. They're going to sell.
Hard work can be fun.
Bowden Center.
It's work.
And they have us like put up some kids and eat with them, and I said, darn it.
Probably shouldn't have met him. I memorized everyone's name.
And it doesn't matter. I'm no
Aaron.
You know, there's some things.
Yeah, you can always use.
Nice to meet you.
As I was walking out the
and
door last 2 weeks ago. Do that.
Oh, there's a lot of us. And it's,
And it says,
History of that one. Why I
and I'm so excited about the level.
so it was a really good, and I still,
that was a resident.
That the educators have
But it's gonna be interesting. I mean, I'm not new. I've been on the camp board for a year, but I'm new to it.
kind of feels like the table shrunk.
You know Randy Durheim? He was the board president.
The view here is a lot better.
He ran Trey restaurants.
Oh, I have kids in the district. Change in Sioux Falls.
Well, good evening, everyone. So good to see you all again tonight. If you haven't had a chance to grab a plate of food in the kitchenette, please do so. A big thank you to Deanne Conrad for organizing the wonderful dinner for this evening. Thank you, Deanne. Again, tonight we have a full agenda on our plate. Does everybody have, well, besides food, we have a full agenda on our plate in addition to food. Does everybody have in front of them a packet for this evening? If you don't, raise your hand quickly and we'll get one to you. If you take a look at it, we will have a follow-up from our task force meeting number 1. We'll go through the school funding overview. We have some high school options to look at, middle school options, elementary, and review of other projects. And then at the end, we will have questions and answers. We will also open up time for anybody that is here from our public to ask questions. Vernon, go ahead.
I think all of you saw all the comment cards we had. Theron McChesney has been working hard between meetings here. He analyzed and categorized all of them and put them in a word cloud on each of the questions so we can better see in those community engagement meetings what people were thinking. And so first of all, I really want to thank him for taking the time to do that. Theron, why don't you grab a microphone and walk us through those briefly.
So as Vernon was saying, I took the comment cards. There were about 166 results from the various sessions and I think some feedback from Roosevelt faculty that was included. And I went ahead and dropped them into a spreadsheet and categorized and kind of read through each of them and grouped them into categories. And, you know, if there was three, like if one answer had three dominant themes, I would put those categories into that grouping. I did that for each of the 4 questions, and then also did a combined, since people would run their answers kind of between each of the questions, if you noticed that they would kind of continue through. I grouped them all together again at the end to see which of those kind of floated to the top. Went ahead and selected top 10 categories as a way of just breaking it down, otherwise they still were very jumbled. So these will be the top 10 groupings or categories for each of the questions. So for the first one, overcrowded or need space was the top result. There were 41 comments in that area on the first question. The first question was, what do you think of the district's facility challenges? The second result was 26 build new, followed by 18 where there was good processor information, meaning they were just congratulatory, saying, hey, this is a great process, thanks for doing it. 14 of the comments had indications that we were behind the curve, that we should have been starting this earlier. Those were the comments that said something along the lines of, hey, should have done this 5 years ago, that sort of thing. And alternative solutions is a category that it was created to go ahead and say, any suggestion other than build or renovate, online learning, all those different, need more project-based curriculum, that sort of thing. And then there was a category that I created for just build generally and build new, where it was specific to a high school, middle school, elementary. Each of those had 12 or 11 responses in the first question. Folks wanted us to focus on long-term solutions. There were 8 responses specific to that. And then again, alternative solutions was specific to a boundary change, showed up in the top 10, and generic, just big problems, meaning the delightful challenges that we've heard about. Go ahead and go to the second one. So the second question, what should the board consider with coming up with a plan? There was a lot of comments regarding school size, maximum size of the various levels of school, along with smaller classes and smaller class size, as well as student-teacher ratios and faculty ratios. Those all got lumped into this grouping of school, smaller size, class size, if you remember the comments on maximums and overcrowding. The second question, by the way, was what should the board consider when coming up with a plan? So school size and classroom size was top of mind. Location was the next with 34 responses. Following enrollment or growth projections of the city and the district came in with 24 different responses in that category. Again, alternative solutions, looking basically at everything, putting everything on the table, had 21 responses. Making sure this is a long-term plan was repeated 14 times. Focus on diversity was listed at 12 different times for that question. Education trends, making sure there was a quality education or best-in-class type comments, came in with 11. Curriculum, again, it would be very similar to education and quality, but curriculum focus resulted with 10. And then boundary changes and equity respectively came in at 9 and 8. Go ahead and go to the next slide, question 3. Question 3 was, what are your thoughts about building on versus building new schools? Build new was the highest category. There were 80 different comments towards building new. That was clearly the focus of the meetings that came back. Again, school and smaller class size, smaller buildings, 57 responses. Renovation came in with 42, so there was an equal amount of reservation, or about half the amount in terms of build new versus renovate. But there was a big question about renovation and feasibility, balancing that against school and smaller class sizes, along with just the structural. There were lots of comments on structural integrity, and can you even add another level and have it be physically sound? Safety kind of concerns. The biggest thing with regard to those seemed to be comparing reasonable costs. Does it make sense? There were 16 responses there, followed by 10 or less location, community, building specifically a new high school, focusing on all alternative solutions, boundary changes, everything, and making sure it's long-term. Go ahead and go to question 4. What additional information do you need to be better informed? What have we missed? Mostly this was just things, honestly, that we're going to be covering tonight. The first thing was communication, keep the lines of communication open, make sure the public's involved and that input is respected. Compliments towards good information and process. The location, being cognizant of the location and where put the schools where enrollment and growth projections indicate. These are out of order now on my sheet. Location, so safety and security, followed by boundaries, smaller schools, and alternative solutions with under 10. And then if you go to Q4, combining everything, this is everything with top 40. So now we're going from top 10 to top 40 comments. So you can kind of see, trying to include everything from each of the top 10s. So we're looking at communication at 46 responses, overcrowding and needing space with 28, renovate had 37 responses, building new still came in at one of the top spots with 78 grouped responses, and focusing on alternative solutions with 40, meaning keep everything on the table, and making sure it's a long-term plan had 27. Say no surprises. Basically, if you saw it in the earlier ones, it rolled up into the top ones in the same way.
Any questions for Theron? Theron, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
That was a great effort. Let's give him a hand. Dina.
Vernon, is there some way we can put, if Theron is okay with it, that we could put this on the website in that piece with a comment from this task force saying, here's what we learned from your responses, so that they see that we are really, thanks to Theron, he's made it visible for everyone, that we are really using what they told us, and it's going to guide what we do.
I think that's a great idea, Dina. Thank you. Deanne?
Have it up tomorrow morning.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Be there tomorrow morning. Homework. Everyone got their homework? Was it delivered okay? Lots of big files, lots to read. Everyone's okay with how it was received? Okay.
I do have one comment. There was a question about the maps that came from the city, and in reducing the size of the maps, I think map number 4 and 5 has the big black streets across. We did add those to the website as well, so if you want to go out and look specifically at the maps provided by Mike Cooper and his department, we added those. It would have been a lot of printing in color, which is also doesn't do a lot.
Way to save those dollars, Deanne.
Absolutely.
So tonight is where we start to begin to narrow that focus even more. Really it comes down to 3 questions for us. What is the need? When do we need it? And how are we going to pay for it? So that's the context that I think we all need to start listening to the presentations. And first up tonight is Todd Beek. He's going to start with the school funding overview, including the CIP.
Thank you, Vernon, and thanks all of you for coming back again. Coming from our perspective, Doug Morrison kind of does a lot of the work of putting the slides together, make sure they're all kind of cohesive, and he tells us how much time we get to speak, and he told me, you get school funding 101, and I said, okay, I've done that probably, dozens of times, maybe 100 times since I've been in this job. I've spoken to community groups, students, parent groups. So I said, how much time do I get? He said 10 minutes and 2 slides. And
We're ahead of schedule, so you get more time, Todd.
Well, so I'm going to rename this school funding 1.01, okay? So we'll proceed. I wasted, if I can get this thing going. Is it all right? All right. So very quickly, we divide our budget up into kind of 2 categories of funds, and I'm only going to focus on the one. The one is tax-supported funds. This is kind of a combination of a couple different slides we typically use. In the In the tax-supported funds, we have the general fund, special ed fund, and capital outlay fund. Now, it looks like there's more than that up there because we split the general fund into two different categories. One is the unrestricted general fund. Those are dollars where virtually they're at our discretion to use, as we want, as long as we're following state law. The other is the restricted general fund, and that's mostly federal grants, where kind of the idea on that is if you cut the program, you lose the money. So you can't take that money and plan to pay the business manager salary with it. For instance, if you cut the program, if you don't do class size reduction or you don't do what the specific grant is for, you can't redirect it into anything else. So that's why we split those two up. But between the two, the general fund is about 68% of these, what we call tax-supported funds. Special ed fund, one other thing about the general fund. General fund pays the heat, the lights, the teacher salaries, the business office salaries, the superintendent, the basic operations of the school district. Busing costs come out of there, just your basic operations, and most of it obviously is salaries and benefits, and that's about 85% of the budget. And of that, most of that is teacher salaries. Special ed pays for the same types of things as the general fund, but it's for kids who are on an IEP. It's the kind of the general fund for the special ed program. And that is about 19% of our budget. Between those two funds, those are the two where, in addition to property taxes, we get state aid for those. And just very quickly, whether it's the general fund or the special, I'll talk about general fund because we talk about it more. They just count up your number of students. They tell you between state aid and local property taxes, you're going to get roughly $5,500 a student. And they said, now, we'll tell you how much to levy locally. And if you levy at that amount, what's left over is going to be state aid. So whether you're the most tax-rich, property tax-rich school district in the state or the poorest, you're going to get the same amount per student. And it works that way for general fund, and it works that way for the special ed fund. So you always pay first with your property taxes, and then whatever doesn't fill that bucket full, the state comes in and adds to that. And then you can opt, if that's not enough money, you can opt out. And of course, we've opted out in Sioux Falls. Right now, we're at $9.1 million in our opt-out. So you think of growth, if we can only grow more, if we could have more property value, well, the more property value you have in those two funds where you get state aid, just the less state aid you receive. And in Sioux Falls, or statewide, we're about 60% in the general fund is 58, I think. 58% is state aid, 42% is local funds, and we're about at that level here. We're close to that level here. A lot of that is some opt-out in that number there, though, so we're not quite at that high of a ratio. We don't get quite as much state aid as the average school district in the state. So that's the general fund, and the same concept works for special ed fund. The last tax-supported fund that we have right now is the capital outlay fund, and that is just a levy. The maximum levy is $3 per student, but a couple years ago, they changed that, and I'm going to get into that in a second here, but they changed that so most districts are below $3 per student at their max, and I'll talk about that in a second. Capital outlay fund is 13% of these tax-supported funds. So between the three of them, we spend $251 million. That's what's in our budget next year. Yeah, then if you look up top, the very top there, that shows our levies, our tax levies. Oh, by the way, I know what I was going to say when I said bond redemption. If we do a bond, if we did a bond where you have an election, which is what we're kind of talking about in this whole process, possibly, that would be a fourth fund that would be in here, and that'd be tax supported as well. There isn't a maximum on that, other than your total debt of your district can't be more than 10% of your total valuation. That's the max that's on that. Otherwise, the county auditor will levy what you need each year to pay off your debt service for that next year. But we don't have that on here right now because we don't have a bond that we're paying off. So that's not showing in our budget. So up top is what our levies are. And those are per $1,000 of valuation. So in the general fund, the amount that to get state aid on an owner-occupied property to maximize your state aid is $337. On commercial, it's $698. And the reason for that is they funded many years ago, in 1995, they passed it. They funded property tax relief through the state aid formula. So they set the ag levies lowest, and then owner-occupied, and then commercial. Our opt-out levy is next to that. It's part of the general fund, but we're separated out here. 57 cents for owner-occupied and $1.18 for commercial. And the reason for that is if you opt out, you got to keep those same ratios between the commercial and the owner-occupied. And we don't show ag. We have very little ag property in our district, so we typically don't show that. Next is capital outlay. We are at our, special ed. Special ed, $1.46. We could be at $1.66. $1.66. They give you a 20-cent. You need to be at $1.46 to maximize your special ed. They'll give you a 20-cent amount. Actually, this is this year. So we are at the max. Next year, we're going down 20 cents. But they'll give you 20 cents to go above your state aid qualifier in special ed fund. This year, we max out. Next year, we actually drop that by 20 cents because the state levies, required levies kind of went up, so we wanted to offset those. So that special ed levy is actually going to drop next year. Capital outlay is next. I said $3 earlier, and I talked about that new law. We are now at $287. That's our max. We're down 13 cents off that figure, and I'll explain how that works when we get to the next slide. So the next grouping over here is just shows you our owner-occupied levy. Our total owner-occupied levy is $8.27. That item that says rank comes off another slide where we've got 10 of our neighboring school districts around. So we're the 11th or the lowest. We have the lowest levy of the neighboring school districts here. Commercial, we rank 8th. We're at 1249. We rank 8th there. And then that very far grouping, it just tells you, one of the things we've heard from people not from around Sioux Falls, usually legislators, is, yeah, well, you guys have all this valuation. You guys have all this valuation. And they think of that, not us and Rapid and Aberdeen and Brandon. We do have a lot of valuation, but we have a lot of students too. So statewide, out of roughly 160 schools, we're 135th in valuation per student. So we're actually quite low in valuation per student. And then of our 11 neighbors, we rank 7th in valuation per student. That's what's going on there. So that's a quick overview of the funds, and then I'm going to specifically get into kind of our capital outlay plan. So I've been promising this, so I'm going to get to it right away. If you look at the very bottom, or not the very bottom, third of the bottom row on this, kind of right in here. When 2 years ago, 2016, the legislature passed a law that said your capital outlay fund, your upper limit is $3, but also you can't grow more than 3% of inflation, whichever is less, plus new construction. So if you had a vacant lot and a $200,000 house was built on that, you could levy your levy on that, and that would be new. But if you had a house that was already on that lot, and it was a $200,000 house, and inflation was, well, the first year inflation was 0%, you couldn't increase on that. So you can go up to 3, but it's inflation or 3%, whichever is less. So they said, so do you have 2 limits now, $3 or you can't go above 3. So if you were declining in value, you couldn't go from 3 to 305 to 308 to whatnot. So that's our upward limiting factor now is 3% inflation, whichever is less, plus new construction.
Would you like? Are you showing
That one
us?
there, yeah. Oh. Is this, oh, it's on here.
Yeah, it should be.
Oh, sorry. I guess I only have 2 slides, so. Anyway, you guys have it in front of you, right? it looks like this. This is the slide we're looking, I'm sorry. It's on my screen.
I understand. I'm not
So anyway, does that make sense? I know it was asked about what it changed, but that changed. So what we've got on here is if we were at the max, the old max, what we could be raising more in capital outlay. So the first, in FY19, we show that as one, but if we were up 13 cents higher, we'd be $1.6 million more per year that we'd be able to levy in the capital outlay fund. And then we're estimating out by FY23, it'll be $3.2 million is what we will be able to levy less in a year because of this new restriction on capital outlay. And honestly, the reason it went in is because ag values were kind of going crazy for a while there, and they were going up 10% a year, and they put a fix in, a statewide fix that probably was more about agricultural heavy school districts. So that's this part of it. So now I'll take you up to the top. So this is our total valuation, is very first up top here. So we're at about 11.5, estimated $11.5 billion next year, growing to 13.7 out in FY23. And then we estimate what our capital outlay levy is going to be. And as it gets further and further away from $3, that's where that number, that discrepancy number at the bottom grows. And then, by far, there's no state aid here. So obviously the biggest part of our revenue is property taxes. It's almost all of it in the capital outlay fund. And then our major uses of the money, we talked about capital outlay certificates a little bit last year, and I know I think you got that information in your packets between the meetings. But those are capital outlay bonds. We pledge this to pay those off instead of the general obligation bond. And the debt service on that this year is $13.9 million. Technology, we have a technology plan we try to fund every year. It's budgeted at about $4 million a year. We're just slightly under that this year. In 21 and 22, that goes up substantially. It's because we set aside money for every 6 or 7 years. We have to replace our wireless routers, and I don't know what else they're called, but the wireless infrastructure. And so we set aside money, and then we'll tap into that in those years. So we're still really allocating about $4 million out of the budget. But yeah.
So help me understand. So the capital outlay and our opt-out have been our primary funding sources other than the tax?
Yeah, okay, so I'm going too fast. Capital outlay, opt-out, yeah, I know, I didn't. I should have had about 7 more slides I used. In the general fund, which is the biggest part of our budget, that's where you opt out, okay? And that funds things like teacher salaries. Now, that's the biggest part of the general fund is teacher salaries. It also funds the heat and the lights and salaries of a lot of other people. That's where you opt out in the general fund, and it's for your day-to-day operations. Capital outlay fund is basically for 2 things: equipment, and of that a big part is technology, and bricks and mortar. And a lot of that is renovations and you're redoing roofs and things like that. But you can also issue what are called capital outlay bonds, or technically capital outlay certificates. And those are like when we built our latest elementary, Sonia Sotomayor, we issued a capital outlay certificate, then we paid the debt off on that out of the capital outlay fund.
So is the reason why you haven't gone for a bond because we're looking for a bigger chunk of money in a bonding issue, or we don't have to, you have to take it to a vote through capital outlays, or?
And we could fund it within our limit, in our capital outlay limit. And honestly, when they did it, the last bond in 1997, they made a promise it was a 5-year promise, and it went on forever, which was between that bond and the capital outlay fund, we're going to levy what we were levying before. And we honestly, Dina was on the board, and we kept that going for years and years and years and years beyond that, until finally we retired the bond early and basically then took our capital outlay up to the max. But it's because we didn't have to, because we could afford to do these buildings out of the capital outlay fund. That's what was going on there. I'm glad you asked that question, because I really skipped over the general fund versus the capital outlay fund and what's the difference in there. So just real quick, So we also have to do the year-to-year, and Jeff Kreider's got it's at least a 15-year document. It's about that thick that shows year-to-year what is scheduled to just be fixed, not anything new, not any additions, just maintenance, roofs, carpet, et cetera. And that's scheduled for about $6.3 million next year. We have it out at $8.2 million out in FY23. So then there's other miscellaneous items in there, about $2.5 million. And then we have 1 year, one-time transfer to the general fund. We've been, for years, the state, especially when times got tight, said you can spend some general fund expenditures out of the capital outlay fund. And then they said, well, instead of, and now the law says you can spend up to 45% to pay for the general fund. Well, that's kind of crazy to do that, because you're trading roofs for supplies and things like that. So we were getting through a kind of a low spot when we had a 0% increase from the state, or a 0.3% increase. So we need one more infusion of that cash. And this year we were at about 2.5. Next year 5.5, and then we're wiping it out off our 5-year plan in the general fund. So that is a kind of a one-time. It's the last time. We've been doing it for about 3 or 4 years at a substantial rate. We've been paying for 15% of our bus contract since 1999 or 2000, because we contract for busing. Normally, if you didn't contract for busing, you'd have to buy buses. And they said, well, that could have been a capital outlay expense, and they figured that's about 15% of your total busing budget. So we've always done that, way back to the origins of this formula. But our plan is to not do any more at all of it anymore, and try to devote these dollars to the infrastructure and to the equipment. So at the very bottom, if you look, so we'll take out 19 because we have that transfer in there, but if you look at 20, 21, and 22 at the very bottom, we show, like next year, 0.67%. That's saying that $6.5 million, which seems like a lot, and that's really undesignated for projects. But if you look at our total valuation of our buildings, what it would cost to replace our schools, it would be $976 million. So that is just a kind of a tiny fraction of the overall cost of our buildings. And seems like a big number, just like our 11 billion seems like a big number. But when you look at it as a part of our overall capital projects budget, it isn't much. That's all I had. I think I went over my time.
Let's take a few minutes. Are there questions for Todd on these numbers? Theron, please speak in the mics too when you ask your questions, because Ben is recording it.
So the $5.7 million that goes back to the general fund in terms of transfers out, that's lost to the district, or does that come back through?
No, we needed to balance. Our general fund was if you look at that other page, the previous page, our general fund revenues were going to be about $6 million short, $7 million short. So we also get a small transfer from STI. So that's why the numbers aren't the exact same. But we get $5.9 million in transfers. $5,750,000 of that is going away because we're not going to do it from the capital outlay fund. Now we think we have our general fund worked out for the next 5-year plan, but we needed that cash this year because we got a 0.3% and then we got a 1% from the state. We're trying to keep our salaries moving. 2 years ago, they got the teacher salaries. They infused we did the half-cent sales tax. We don't want our salaries to just fall right back. So we're trying to keep those moving, and that's why we infused the capital outlay cash for one time in there. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? So it's going to help fund the general fund for 1 year.
Other questions?
I'm not sure how much this question has to do with what we're doing, but under revenues, we have other local sources, and under total uses, we also have other. What is included in those others?
In the revenue, the other local sources are things like as small as what you pay to go to a basketball game and things like that. We also have gross receipts tax. We have, it's a state, I'm trying to think of the big ones, but.
Centrally assessed properties?
Those show up as property taxes, the centrally assessed do. But let me give you some bigger ones. Medicaid revenue is local. Gross receipts tax is a big one. Mobile home taxes, penalties and interest on taxes. Those are some of those other categorical items. And what was the other question was on?
On the others and expenses for capital outlay, what we spend out of capital outlay.
Well, a lot of that is just equipment that isn't like maintenance vehicles, mowers, items such as that. How much was that? $2.5 million. It's just other musical instruments are about $300,000 or $400,000 every year to replace those.
Is curriculum included in that other?
There's a little bit of curriculum. We budget about $250,000 for the equipment side of curriculum. Some years it's high, some years it's low, but we carry it over one way or the other. So in the years where it's higher, where it's more equipment intensive, we have the carryover money. In years where it's low, that's when we save it up for those higher years. But we set aside about $250,000 for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Todd? Maybe just a clarification, Todd. You talked about the opt-out. Do you know how many of the 160 or so districts in the state are opted out?
Yeah, I know those that have, it's over 100. I'm guessing right now it's about half probably have opted out, are currently in an opt-out right now. I honestly haven't looked at that for a few years, but.
It's a majority.
Yeah, it's a majority. Majority, yeah, and I know some have opted out and maybe aren't right now, but over 100 districts have opted out. And right now, I guess there's at least, I can find out actually pretty easily, but I'd guess that there's at least half are opted out right now.
And we have 2 opt-outs, correct?
Yeah, we have 2. The 2 together total $9.1 million.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
We will, if more questions crop up, we can bring Todd back up at the end of the discussion. Next up is Jeff Kreider, who's going to walk us through each of the options for the schools: high school, middle school, elementary. So we'll spend the first 20 minutes talking about high school options. Jeff.
If I don't trip over here by the time this is done. Yep. Okay, I'm going to give you a little background on some of this information. This is kind of a culmination of a lot of different things. We've got growth, we've got requests from buildings, we've got a lot of different things which total about $278 million. Now, that number is probably the worst case scenario through here, so kind of rest easy when you see that. And there's a lot of work that you'll be doing to where we need to be. And a lot of these projects, we'll talk about capital outlay. Some can fit into O&M, that's operation and maintenance. That close to $7 million every year that we put in for roofs and those sort of things, bathroom renovations and those kind of things. So some of that's in here that we just need to shuffle into the right categories. And then some of these probably should go on hold. And we've kind of showed some of these, but feel free to look at them if you don't feel that way. And we're just kind of trying to help a little bit with that. Then what the referendum may look like, and is there some portions that may get deferred to a second referendum down the road. So those are all part of those things, and that's what these will go. So I'm just laying it all out and go through it quick. And then I'll talk a little bit first about how I got numbers here. We kind of take our database, and these numbers are kind of based on what we bid, through the last several years, and I've tried to inflate them up to 2018 numbers. Now, we typically build cheaper than what the national average is, so we're under the national median. So what you'll see here, these are numbers based on what we've been building, based on McGovern, based on the addition at CTE. So if there's a remodel, we'll use our remodeling numbers and so forth. So I've tried to inflate those numbers because McGovern was in 2014, so I tried to get them up to the 20. And then we've looked at what I've gotten from planning for assessments, you know, what the roads are, or what they're currently at, and those sort of things up to the 2018 numbers. So as you go through there, the elementaries are based on Sotomayor numbers. We haven't had a high school for quite a while, so we've looked at the McGovern. Then I've adjusted the auditoriums and the food service, and then we've added into tracks and those sort of things because they don't exist in that magnitude at a middle school. So we've tried to adjust that to make them more current. So with that, we'll just start with high schools. I think these will be fairly easy, but first one is purchase land and build a new traditional high school. That's one. The total cost is approximately $84.7 million, and that includes land. I've included the 35 acres that, if everyone knows it, Sandford has looked at donating 35 acres. That's about $2.3 million in value, but the 84 includes that whole value. So with that, and then there's an option for another 10 acres, 0.7 in that same location. These numbers include all the A costs, all the construction management costs, includes land development, which are roads and assessments, track and field, and all the furnishings and equipment. So there's about $5.4 million of furnishings and equipment to furnish that high school. And then that'd be food service and those sort of things. That building would be based on this, and it can be scaled to any size we want, is 1,800 student capacity. Another option would be is add on to existing traditional high schools. We didn't even estimate this one. It's so complex that you would really have to almost go through and redo most of these schools, all your gyms, your music areas, your tech ed areas, all the corridors, all those pieces would have to be looked at and how you're going to accomplish what you would do in those buildings. The sites are small. Lincoln really has no place to add on to. And all your other schools are pretty well landlocked for parking. We actually lease parking with the parks on Washington and Roosevelt. So it's pretty well landlocked. We could probably get some more capacity there, but we would really have to look at what we're going to do with parking. Mike probably won't even let us build if we don't have the right parking anymore. So there's some big issues that we'll have to work through if that's a route we need to go to. Another one would be expand the current CTE facility. Once again, we didn't estimate this. We got to look at, we can put classrooms on to offload some of those, but what do you do? Because they're all going to go back to that high school for lunch, for other things. So unless we build food service and those sort of things there, it was really built for a traditional or a tech ed school and not a traditional high school. And if you look at converting that to a traditional high school, there's really not enough land that we own and could utilize at that location. Okay, those are the high school options that we've kind of looked at.
Any questions on the high school options for Jeff?
Just one, Jeff. How many acres do Roosevelt and Washington High currently occupy?
They're about 40 acres.
So that they would, this new, actually
we'd
5
probably
acres
need to
less?
exercise that other option if we were going to go out there, because you start, we looked at when we did McGovern out there, you bought 40 acres, then you start, giving your H lots for streets and that, it all of a sudden goes down to about 38 and those sort of things. So you don't get the exact acreages once you build that. Mike can probably walk through that and concur with some of those decisions, but that would be very comparable to what those other schools, 2 other schools would be. Lincoln is quite a bit smaller, but they're about 35 when you get that railroad property that we acquired. So that helped out down there.
Jeff, can we look at any existing buildings that might be reconfigured, that's abandoned or going to be abandoned, that might be reconfigured for a high school?
There's really none that has the land acreage. I mean, we had a call on the 2 Kmart buildings. You look at that, you just don't have enough land, and by the time you start reconfiguring that, you're gonna have as much into it as you would if you started in the new.
I was thinking of the Citibank building when that moves, but that might not be soon enough or whatever, but if you think about how that's wired and everything else.
Yeah, there'd be significant modifications needed, but, something like that could work. I think they have a lot of land out there. So,
My question was on, so we're working to keep equity among all the schools. So what happens when we build a new high school? Does that in some way affect, will we need to make changes to the other high schools to keep everything in equity?
I'll turn that over to our curriculum people, but
Okay.
there is one other thing on that $84 million. I do have about $7.5 million in there of contingency for that innovative design of classrooms that people were talking about. So we did put some dollars in that. So the thought would be we work through the standards documents and make sure that we're meeting all the standards. You're not going to build a gym that is 3 times bigger or significantly bigger. That's going to impact all the other ones, because we've learned in the past that once you do one, and you'll see a couple projects in here because of that, that are listed, that once you do one, that's the new standard. And so that goes through. So I don't know how you'll address some of those, but I would guess we'll have to look at those schools once this gets identified, and if we have capacity, we may be doing some unique things to those other schools after we get going.
But at this point, you're basically standard what exists today.
Yeah, this is based off what exists today, plus a 10% contingency, so we can be a little more innovative in our thought processes when we...
So that would be a limitation on us to think about capacity within really an already predetermined structure or size. We have
Square foot plus
there's
another-
really not a lot of plus or
Yeah,
minuses.
we don't know. I don't know what that's going to be.
Right.
We just put some dollars in there to do that.
Okay.
As we're moving through, I know the advantage listed here is the Sandford site and obviously the value of that donation. Are other potential sites identified for high school, middle school, and elementary school? Are those referenced in each grade level we're about to go
No, we do
through?
not.
Okay.
And just for clarification, you're assuming the value of the land in the cost total, correct?
Yes.
Even though it may be donated?
Yes, you would take that off that number if we so choose to go to that location. I know there's another west side that the family from California has expressed interest, over by McGovern, that they might be interested in talking, but we have not pursued any of those dynamics.
I want to go back to the question that was asked over here. I think the McGovern land is land that we have secured if we build a building there, but I don't want this group to think we have to build a building there. So that's still open for conversation. We're not directing you to tell us to build a building there. That's just an option and a resource that we do have.
And that'll be listed under the elementary. You did a good job.
But just to confirm what I believe I heard, not sure if it was last meeting, the Sandford donated land, there is a contingency on there that for the school district to get it, that they have to build a school on it to get it for free, correct?
Yes. It has to be either a high school, middle school, or elementary. They did not say, didn't have any of those stipulations on it. So just that we have to build a school there. If it doesn't, that doesn't move forward.
Is there an expiration date on that offer?
2021. I think it's like 3 years, wasn't it?
We have
we have to break ground, I think, by the summer of 2021. I might be off a little bit on that date, but I'm pretty close.
Any other strings attached to that?
Okay, moving forward, middle schools. Purchase land and build a traditional middle school. That's about 43.1. There's some assumptions, again, of what the land might cost. I just used that Sandford number that we had, and we just know that it needs to be about 20 to 25 acres. Don't know if it should be on the east or west side. That's something we'll probably look at. And that number includes AE cost, $3.3 million for furnishings and $1 million for roads and assessments. And assessments are zoning and tying into the sewer. When you get into a trunk, they have cost per acre, what that things will be. This one, as estimated, is a 1,000 student capacity with a special ed component with it. Very similar to the size of McGovern. Okay, then there's an option to add on to existing middle schools. That's about $15.5 million. There's a lot of variables with that, if it's even feasible. But Memorial, there's room to add, put about 3.7 for another 170 student capacity. Edison, we looked at, I don't know, there's a house on the north side we've acquired on that site, so you could put a wing on that. Patrick Henry, we looked at the potential to put some classrooms on the south side of Patrick. And McGovern, we are able to put a wing on the west side of that, and that would tie in very, very good for 170. Those are some of those you might want to think about in the future. So when you're trying to strategize, if it does grow beyond what the current is, and keep that in your toolbox and options down the road. Edison and Patrick are very difficult because the infrastructure, once again, you're talking about dining rooms aren't built for more kids. The parking isn't built. There's no land to build parking. Mike will probably say we need to buy some properties around there. That number doesn't include buying additional properties around there to add spots. And putting all those on would only add about 580 some students, so it doesn't get us to quite where we need to be. So those are, we needed to look at that and look at that option, but there's a lot of variables in that option, and I don't know how we would solve. I think we can solve the dining area at Edison, but I don't think we can solve the dining at Patrick Henry and some of those things. So there's some real dynamics in those schools that I don't think would be potentially the best solution. But
So I have one more question, and that concerns the numbers. So we would expand capacity potentially by adding on to the existing middle schools. So those numbers, like an additional 170 at Memorial, is that making room for how far over we are already? Or is it just we would add on to what we have? So we're counting what we have is...
Yeah, they'd barely take the kids that we have. They probably wouldn't take the kids that we have, so, yeah. Yeah.
Jeff, what is capacity at McGovern?
It's 890. It's really, depends on if the new school takes some of the special ed component. It was designed for 1,000, but most people don't realize that at the last minute, we moved special ed over there, which took 5 classrooms quick, and that was going to go to McGovern, but we saw McGovern's coming, so we moved it over there. That's why the capacity and some of that's down there. Memorial to McGovern. So.
I'll get up.
I have a question. About, I guess, the tipping point of how big a school should be. There were a lot of comments in the public input about feeling small and inclusive and like a community. And so I'm wondering, is 1,000 kids too big? already, or is it not big enough? Is it efficiencies in creating one building that'll house all these kids?
I think if you build a building and keep 1,000 that's built for that, it'll be a good building. Where if everything's designed correctly, you got 1,000 kids, you're not, putting a lot more of the capacity. So I think if you design the building for what the capacity is for corridors, for auxiliary spaces and those sort of things, it'll be a good building. And we're going over the top of that, and that's why we're here. Yeah.
I'll try to take a stab at that question too. So I look at that from a couple of different perspectives. One, I look at it from a student achievement perspective. Do kids learn better in this environment versus that environment versus the next environment, of those environments being determined by size? And there isn't anything that I can find that shows that the right number exists for a size of a school. So if I go off of that, then I get to look at it from a financial perspective. At the elementary level, there are some efficiencies that are gained once you have 4 units per elementary. And for those of you that don't know what that means, 4 units just means I have 4 kindergarten sections, 4 first grade sections, 4 second grade sections. And if you're wondering, well, how do you gain those efficiencies? It's at that point where you don't have traveling teachers for your specialties, for your art, for music, for PE. So instead of paying people to travel, there's enough work right for them in that building. So, answer to your question, at the elementary level, from a finance perspective, that's about 600 students. And you can go up from there. So that's where we gain some efficiencies there. At the middle school level, I don't think the science is near as good that I look at. Where do we gain the right efficiency level? I would tell you about 1,000. And at the high school level, I would tell you about 1,800. But that's because that's where we've defined the efficiencies in the past. If I was in a community that had a number of 1,200 student high schools, we would probably base our efficiencies based on that number. So from our perspective, 600 or larger at the elementary level, about 1,000 at the elementary level, or middle school level, and about 1,800 at the high school level. That might have been more than you bargained for. But.
Jeff, when we're looking at room allocations, like in a middle school or an elementary school, and we have either class size reduction or we have specialty classes that require those classrooms to be smaller, how do we account for that when we look at a general number?
In my capacities, I have smaller rooms broken down. I don't put them into the classroom counts, but where they break down, I have those identified. We do have some of those where they're openable into a full classroom. So we've got those identified that they could potentially hold so many. But all those smaller rooms in those schools are not put into that capacity. So they can break out into resource and those sort of specialty rooms.
So if we're doing with, like Read 180 at a middle school, where the class size is...
Yes, we account for those.
You account for those.
Yeah.
So in what we're looking at, you've accounted for some middle schools to have more classrooms available because programming will require them to have smaller class size.
Yeah, I don't know which one you've got, but there was one that I said it's adjusted, and I've taken those into account and adjusted it, where we're using some of those rooms for full classrooms. It's just like a staff dining room. That's a full classroom, and when the principal is telling me how many classrooms they're using, they're counting for that. I can't do that in the capacity when you're looking at that capacity.
Thanks, Jeff.
Jeff, one more quick question, just as a point of reference, and I'm getting ahead of myself probably a little bit, but what did it cost to build McGovern compared to your price here?
Oh, I'd have to go look.
Okay. I'm just curious. It's because that's a question that's going to come up down the road.
But you can't look at that. I mean, I looked at when you put the inflation on it, we're pretty darn close to this.
Okay.
With those numbers, because the land was purchased several years earlier, and we only did half roads. We didn't do all the roads. So there's a lot of variables that is associated with that. The city did a lot of work for us for the for the main roads and it's arterials versus, collectors and those sort of things. There's a lot of variables that go into that. So in the high school one, I did a number of Washington costs for furnishing equipment. You take the contingency, we're right at, if you put about 4% inflation on there, it's almost identical. So it is amazing how close that is. Okay, are we ready to move to elementary?
Just had one question on middle school that, Whittier wasn't mentioned, but I know it did come up earlier with the age of the school.
It's still coming.
Okay.
Okay. And we have some handouts for you too on that. Okay, ready? Moving in elementary. First one is build a traditional elementary school. That's about $7.6 million. That includes the AE cost, $1.4 million for furnishing the equipment, $0.5 million for roads and assessments, and I think there's also another $0.6 out there that, since there's a city park there, that we would have to work with them on sharing the cost of that out at McGovern. So we have a full loop around there, so Valley View gets extended, and the yet-to-be-named street is there, and then the Eagle's Nest, I believe it is. So this would just be accommodate growth. Then we'd have to look at when that's needed and what the best solution for that is. Like Dr. Maher said, we're not telling you to build it here, but with this land is already in our inventory. And we did plan we kind of have that planned in that corner of the site. Another option would be build an early childhood center at the Lincoln Elementary site. This is about a $15.5 million. There's a lot of assumptions in that, how big it needs to be, what it is. I think there was about 20-some classrooms. This is centralized early childhood, free up capacity in other schools across the district. One intriguing item is move screening and evaluation area from central services, because we have about $600,000 in there to renovate, so they have ample space. If we moved it there, we wouldn't incur that cost. But it also has some disadvantages, increased busing expenses. It's going to be a difficult building if we ever decide that not an early childhood center to repurpose, because everything will be in the 3-year-olds and so forth. So everything will be sized to the real small kiddos. And then we need to purchase about half a block to have enough site size to make that work over there. It does not all fit on the current Lincoln L site.
And the cost on the early childhood is based on how many children?
What are they running? 17 in a room. Yeah, they run morning and afternoon, so you can get 34.
Jeff, centralizing that at Lincoln, what capacity does that give us in the other elementaries then? How much space does it free up for?
Well, you're probably going to be shy of, there's about 20-some. If we put in 20 classrooms, we can probably, because there's 35 classrooms spread across the district. So about an elementary school, equal classrooms.
You said 20 classrooms?
Yeah, this is based on that. I mean, it's scalable. It's just a matter of what we need. If we're trying to get everything out there, you got to look at busing and where the kids are as well.
The Lincoln Elementary site, that's the community garden near
Yes.
Sioux Falls?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, we still own that. We're letting the community garden people use it. And the parks, actually, we have an agreement with them that they mow it. We take care of the snow. So we kind of always try to share community spaces in that.
The traditional elementary school listed on line 1 for the $17.6 million, is that intended for the 600 students Dr. Maher mentioned as an ideal target for an elementary school population?
It would be the exact same. I mean, we have the option. It's based on what Susan B. Anthony is and what's one of my areas.
And that's in that 600 range?
That's square footage. Yep. Another option for elementary is expand Horace Mann. That's a behavior site. 2.6. This would add 6 classrooms and additional parking lot for the program growth. That is right up to the end. We're this summer dividing a kindergarten room, so we have 2 spaces, and that's about the last option that we have available. We've taken all staff areas out. So they're tight. They need some growth. I've seen since I've been here, it go from when it was at Jefferson, two mobile units, to then we moved inside and it went to 6, and now we're almost full over there. So that program has grown over the years, and I think something needs to be done. If we don't do it here, we're going to have to find an alternative site somewhere for this.
Just real quick on that, is the growth in that program commensurate with the growth of the district? Or is it above or below, or?
I would say it's with the district.
Options at the elementary level and the middle school level include the purchase of additional property. Do we have the right of eminent domain? What is our practice in
we do have that right, but we have
but-
never exercised that right since I've been here. So, I mean,
And we're not excited about exercising it in the future.
But what happens if somebody jacks up the price of their property? You then, at that point, you do have you might exercise it?
We do. That's certainly a tool that we have and that a municipality would have. What we try to do right now really is have enough foresight to have that sense of prophecy to figure out how can we play the waiting game and purchase the land on our terms.
okay, moving on to Whittier and Cleveland. I got a handout for both, and I'll. You got some extra ones. Yeah, we'll do both. Make sure if they don't have yours. It's yours. I don't know. I'll walk you through this handout, so once we get everybody distributed.
You may talk to the whole group. You can talk to me. Yes.
Did everybody get some over here? Did I divide them close?
You good on the other one? Everybody got it?
No, you need Cleveland. You've got Whittier, you have 2. Whittier and Cleveland.
Cleveland coming?
No, there you go. Jeff got it.
I think I only made 40 of them, so. Okay. Okay, we'll start with Whittier. Whittier, to replace the building is about $41.2 million, and that includes about $4.7 million for the land. I basically took an average of prices for houses and counted out how many houses we potentially need. This would be 2 blocks of houses. And you got a map in here. Whether we need 2, we might only need 1.5, but we got to keep, I wanted to make sure we had enough to cover. That land number also includes demoing the existing houses, so we have the option to rent them. We've got several rentals now where we've bought places, and we'll talk about them in some of these other ones. And then we have a management company lease them and so forth, why we're waiting to do that. So it doesn't look like we're taking the neighborhood away. Whittier is approaching 100 years old. The original building was 1923. It was built as an elementary school. I mean, huge amounts of renovations throughout that building. So it kind of covers the whole gamut. We did a little, up to 2014, we did a little entrance modification for security in there. So it goes from 23 to 14. There's 18 levels. It will never be ADA accessible. And I got maps in here, so Mark, you can kind of look at it. You know, an alternate option would be delay the construction and wait for the second bond for this one. Probably going to take us 3 to 4 years to acquire the land. But that's using that means and methods of being a nice neighbor and working through that. So I'll just walk through the list. Building additions and renovations, that you can see where the numbers are for construction. That includes a demo of the existing facility. Some of the needs are 2 additional science classrooms that really don't have space for that. Renovate science areas, ceilings, change out movable walls. They've asked for that. Casework is getting old. Renovate the lower locker rooms. Renovate art. Most of all these would not have to happen if we have a plan in 10 years to replace this building. So don't think that these all have to happen through that. And then if you look at item 3, that's a preventive maintenance that's in my book of what between now and 2025, and I've got some asterisks of when some of those bigger ones hit, you know, like service elevator. That's not an elevator for any pedestrian or kids or anything. It's just where food service brings up their food and takes the garbage down. We would not want anybody riding on that elevator that's a student or not part of the maintenance team. Replace west parking lot in 21, 26. I don't think any of these really would need to happen if we planned out. So there's not an immediate need. The tuck pointing and some of those things, that's an annual thing we look at. So if we're going to keep this building, you know, for 10 years, we're going to look at tuck pointing, making sure it's watertight. We're going to make sure the carpet's good, the painting's good, just like we do in any building up to that point. So that's kind of a discussion we'll all have to have. But just so we're not going to do major renovations, but we're going to certainly keep it where everybody thinks it's a decent building.
I have one question. Is there an option to put the new Whittier School on a different lot and then maybe build an elementary school where the one is so you don't have to acquire additional square footage?
Well, there's a map in here, so if we just walk through these maps. The first one, 8-2, is actually the lower level. And you can see the hatched out where the locker rooms are. The Mark, if you want to start counting stairs and those sort of things. I did it the other day, and there is 18. Then renovate the gymnasium. That's something they would like to see. That's the main level. You can see where the office addition was, so they queue into the office. And then you have the upstairs. Everything's on a split levels. There's about 3 different split levels on every floor. Then the next page is kind of the thought process. What you would do is we would never close Whittier as an attendance site to build. We would keep Whittier going and construct. If you look at right in the middle, I put a footprint of a McGovern, and if you look at another footprint, there's a footprint of Patrick Henry that's a little smaller. So if you look at a Patrick Henry footprint, I'm just trying to give you a scale. This would be designed for this site, a new building totally. This just tries to give you a scale for what a Patrick Henry or a McGovern might take to a scale. Yeah.
Jump in. If your question was limited to that site, I don't think we could build a new middle school there and an elementary school on that site. I think we're too tight on that one site.
No, I was actually referring to not building a middle school on that location, moving Whittier to a different location, basically.
I see.
That would be a little bit more open, able to allocate land easier, and then using the existing location for, say, an elementary school that doesn't require such a large amount of land to build, so you don't have to demo houses.
The answer is yes, we could do that if that was the desire of the group or the community. We could do that.
Yeah. As I look at this map, is that possible to put this building on existing land that the city own, or that the school district owns, or would this require us to access or purchase land?
You would, if you look at that football field, that's a standard for a track and a football field. That's on the top side. So we're trying to bring the building down to that, because right now the kids have to walk through the neighborhood to get down to that field.
So that football field is there?
Yes, that football field is there.
So this land in the middle is available?
And then we would build this.
And then tear it down?
And then we'd raise the existing building and put our parking lot where that existing building is. Now, our east parking lot, as you can see on the right, on the bottom right, potentially we could sell that off. I don't know, I don't see that we would probably need that smaller parking lot, but we'd have to look at that as we develop this site and what needs to happen. So there's a lot of variables here. I mean, you would have to design this. There's a hill that kind of goes down, so there's grade issues that we'd have to deal with. But we know we don't want to recreate that football field somewhere. That's another 2 blocks of houses that you would have to acquire.
So
but it gives you a feel for what that is.
So you're talking about the football field and then going all the way over to Cliff?
No, that doesn't get you to Cliff.
Okay, it says Cliff here on the map.
Cliff is, those other ones I have not just put the houses in. The ones with the squares are full of houses. It does not take all the property all the way to the Cliff Avenue.
But you'd put the new Whittier where the houses are now going down to the football field?
Yes, yes. It's either going to be 32 houses or 43. I mean, if you look at the numbers that are listed.
But there's still residential east of that.
Yes, yeah. There's a separation of residential. I mean, you could, if you felt you needed more practice fields and those sort of things, you could, it just, yeah. I try to minimize the number of houses we would take.
Do we know, do we know what the, what sort of cost would be incurred in designing something that we don't already have the design for?
That's in here. I've got that already figured into this.
Do we own most of those houses between 3rd and 4th?
None.
Or 4th and 5th?
None. I think a lot of them are rentals, but I've not done that research yet. Any other questions on Whittier? That's a complex issue.
Have you talked to the neighborhood about this?
We have not.
Do you know how many kids go to the school that live in walking distance of the school?
We can get that information.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, Cleveland. If you look at Cleveland, there's 2 options here, and you just have to talk about, let's just talk about the first part of that, is to put an addition on it, a gym addition, convert the existing multipurpose, or existing gym to multipurpose room, convert the existing multipurpose to the music area to get it to its standards. It's about $5.7 million, and then there's about $1.9 million of scheduled maintenance. The roof is getting close to replacement, the boilers, and they also have single pane windows that would probably need to be looked at over time. But if you look at it, that's a $7.5 million total investment in Cleveland, but it would add up to about 40 years of additional life to Cleveland. So you got to look at it. And I'm just bringing, do we look at an option to replace it? Because usually when you get close to 50%, you need to say, is it worth putting that money into that building? So you got to, that's why it's out here. It's not there yet, but it's close. So we threw it out here so you can weigh those options. Now, if you look at the last CIP, this project was slated to be done, and security trumped this project, and this was put on the hold side, non-scheduled. So that's where it sits, and that's where it is today. So that's what it is, and I'll just walk you through on options. So it's about a $10 million decision to go from new to renovating this to the standards. You don't get a feel for that building needs to demo if you're walking through it. But you still got to throw it out and say, okay, this is what needs to be done and what has to happen. And you can see the identified on page, the second page is the identified preventive maintenance projects that would go between up to 2025. So if you look at the map on 14-1, it's the third page in, where that addition could potentially sit. Now, one thing I got to tell you is when we do these, we have to base our estimates on something. So I try to put a little bit of schematic design to them. And through CIP 1, 2, and 3, this is how we did it. And then what we do is develop a design team at each school when we move forward. And this is our starting point, but we've had some that become radically different. We don't say this is the only solution. We have that design team look at it and develop it. Some of them have been almost verbatim, but there's been a couple that we've changed, and there's usually tweaks somewhere along the line. So when you look at this isn't what it's going to be, but it's a starting point when we get through the design team. So the building has to have their say on it. I mean, I've talked to the principal when we've developed this, and we've actually have a new principal since we put this together, but that's how we do it when we have these programs and have estimates for it. So if you look at it, that's where it'd probably sit. The playground would get expanded, play structures get relocated, retaining walls would be part of that. If you look at page 2, that would be a similar sized gym to Sotomayor, and that's Susan B. Anthony, Rosa Parks. You'd have some resource rooms, your kindergarten classrooms, things, and early childhood, and you would see how those dominoes would go across and how the multi-purpose room would be the music area. We actually did the original one. There was no windows in that multi-purpose room, but we decided to put the windows in because the multi-purpose was kind of a dungeon, and we put them in so if this ever happened, the windows would still be there. We were going to put them in there for the addition, but we made it better several years ago during that process. Then you go upstairs and how the dominoes would be. I'm also looking at putting some stairs so you'd have an entrance to that gym from 18th Street. One thing we might do is put a boiler room over there instead of where it is in the middle of the building. So there's a lot of variables yet to work through as we design this. If you look at the roof renovation, how those kindergartens, if we're going to do this gym here, the drifting loads of that roof won't support a gymnasium, so we have to redo that roof, that sloped roof that comes really low. So we'll update the unit ventilators and those sort of things as part of that project, and that's included in here. And then if you look at the very last page, this is potentially what a new school might look like on that site. I basically took a Sotomayor building and then put some early childhood little wing on that, and how that might sit in there, how your drop-offs would be, how your parking would be, and then how the playground would be. So those are potentially, and that's just assuming that we take that building if we did that.
And is that on existing property?
That's all on existing property, and we wouldn't have to buy any property at all.
Is the Cleveland school, good generally for ADA accessibility?
Yeah, it's fully ADA.
Okay, good bones to it.
We got, yeah. And we need a new boiler, but the HVAC system, the chiller, the air handlers are all within probably 20 years old. So, all right.
The number of walkers at Whittier is 300. The enrollment is around 900, so about a third of the current students are in the walk area.
Okay. Any other questions on Cleveland? Okay, the next one is security and ADA projects. There's a few buildings that have not had the entrances renovated. We've got the queued where you stop them in the vestibule, but they don't go into the office. They can get into the school. If they get punched in, then they can go without signing their visitors' badges. So this group, which is 4.8 million, includes that. It includes exterior restrooms. The high schools have been asking for exterior restrooms. Now, it's almost impossible to put restrooms out at the football field. The sewer to get there is almost impossible to get to. I'd have to, like at Washington, go across 6th Street and go down in that residential area to get there, or go all the way to 3rd to get sewer access there. Roosevelt's somewhat similar to the way, but what we're proposing is actually adding it on to the building right by that staff entrance, so you can control it. You keep the building shut, but they can access it right there. It's not very far a walk, but they can still access that. Lincoln is actually better because we're designing it so that the bathrooms can be part of a renovation of an existing bathrooms in the E-wing, so I can lock those off and we can have that as the main bathroom and used every day, and then just lock off the school when they have an outside activity. This is during the weekends, after school, where you want the buildings shut down, but you got to keep it open for restroom facilities for those activities. If you have a tennis tournament, those kind of things. So that's what those are. Central services for an entrance, a secure entrance, Robert Frost, Horseman. Then this also includes a stair and elevator addition at Laura Wilder. That will get that building to about 98%. There's two kindergarten rooms on a lower level that you can access from the outside, but there's also going to be 2 kindergartens on the main level. So if we did have a student that needed that, we can accommodate. So and that's fine by ADA for us. So that's what those are.
Jeff, we've been going for about 90 minutes. Let's take a break before you go into the other projects. Take a 10-minute break and be back here at 5 after 7. Jeff, if you want to get us started again.
He asks me questions about
If I get back up there.
Todd did his research already for us, and he has numbers on opt-out.
I think I said there's 160 school districts. There's 150 in the state, and there are currently 66 that are opting out.
Thanks. Jeff?
Okay, we ready to roll? Okay, we're on, I don't even see a page number. Okay. This one, the top one is PE coaches area, training rooms, weight rooms, multi-purpose storage, main gym exiting at Roosevelt and Washington. This will bring Roosevelt and Washington to similar sizes of these spaces that Lincoln has. Now, if you recall, when we talked earlier, that once somebody gets something, everybody wants, that becomes a new standard. So when Lincoln moved their weight room into their wrestling room and moved the wrestling room upstairs, that became the new norm for the weight room. So that's what this does. Coaches area at Lincoln is quite a bit bigger than the other ones. The coaches areas at the Roosevelt and Washington are smaller. It gives us an opportunity. And also, if you remember the exiting out of the gyms, I never liked it, but it meets code. But with all our security things at Washington and Roosevelt, they need 4 exits out of the gymnasium, and one of them goes north, and that small one just by that, it's hard to say, it's northeast on both of them, I believe. But what it does is drop you into the corridor where the weight room is, and then you've got to go through the multi-purpose room to get out. Now, if you don't know that, you walk in there and go, where am I going? You'll probably circle back to the other corridor, which doesn't really pertain to how exiting works. So this is an opportunity to take care of that problem. And we cannot lock that door to that multi-purpose room with the exiting the way it is. So you can't secure that gymnasium. So that's what this is. It puts new coaches areas, training areas, and it does expand the training at Lincoln as well. So that's what that is, and it's about $3.3 million for that. So I'll go through these a little quicker. Memorial Middle School, expand the music area. When we did, Memorial is the biggest middle school we have by several hundred, and probably will, because the classrooms are there, always be a larger one. But when we did McGovern, the choir room and the orchestra room became bigger, and that makes Memorial the smallest orchestra and choir room in the district. This would bring that up. It also gets circulation better, provides more instrument storage. They're busing at the seam. They've taken about every room they can for instrument storage. They've actually taken a custodial area over for instrument storage to get by. But this solves that issue, and it also gets back their practice rooms that they also have storage in. So for those who have not been out there, that's what this is about. Expand the gym at Robert Frost. When we did this was a 3-section school, 4,000 square feet. It's hard to have a activity. Now this doesn't replace that, it just puts another half a gym to the east of that. We can just barely fit it in and gives them the storage that it needs. And we'll get them to that 6,000 square feet so there'll be a movable wall or a curtain. Haven't decided, the building will have that choice. But it will be more linear, but they can house, activities where they have band concerts and those sort of things in a bigger space. And then they can get some of those, some of the special ed, early childhood out of that multi-purpose where they have that second gym area that they use there. So they'll help with the lunches as well.
It was a 4-section school.
It used to be 3 when that gym was on, so it got expanded significantly. So then the Challenge Center went over there as well. So the next one is Hayward gym improvements and multi-purpose. Hayward When we put that community center gym on, we did not put locker rooms or enough storage into that community center. We shared the storage, we put what ours was, but when you look at sharing it with the community center, there's just not enough space. And then there's really not enough table storage. Then they have the early childhood storage and the table storage. So it just dominoes. There's really no storage over there. So the proposal would be is to move the locker rooms over to the west. There's just enough room. I might have to ask Mike for a foot more land, but to get this fitted in. But to get ample storage, move the locker rooms to the gym space so they're next to it. We would gut the locker or the existing locker rooms and make that table storage and early childhood storage and get some storage. Because even right now, the exterior storage is full of tables and chairs, and I don't even have room for a tractor. So there's been a domino that's been created over there for that. That's about $570,000. Jane Addams construct a band and music classroom addition. This again, it was a small school. They don't have band and general music that meets the district standards. Their band is in a 500 square foot room without storage. So that used to be an early childhood office, so we've taken out the office room. So that's what this is. The next one is Jane Addams Playground Parking Lot Land Acquisition. This was on the original last CIP. We don't like kicking people out of their houses. There's an older gentleman that owned, we had options on 3 properties to make this happen. We've got 1 property, and what this does is build a parking lot where the playground is and move the playground internally where there's 2 houses. We've taken the 1 out, and then the houses would be the east of the school, off the gym. So it really makes it a much safer place for kids. And that's what this is, and this includes the cost of buying those 2 houses. They're about 81 years old. We talk to him every year. He's starting to have some health issues, so I think it's just a matter of a year or so that we won't kick him out of his house, but it's getting close. But great people, and we've got the options on it. So, and he owns both those houses. One used to be his parents', but he rents it out. Deanne, you probably knew when that happened, didn't you?
I do. He's a nice man. He and his wife are very nice.
Yeah. Okay, JFK, this is another larger domino. This is one of our larger elementary schools, has a 4,000 square foot gym. All other 4 sections are 6,000. So what this does is constructs a new gym to the east in the parking lot. The existing gym would become the multi-purpose gym. The locker rooms would be made into food service and storage and those sort of things. The existing dining area now, you know, when you look at it, it's really tight because there's 2 corridors that we go into with the tables. So it square foot wise, it meets the standards, but when you take those corridors out, it really doesn't meet the standards. They've been able to make it work, but what we would do is convert that area into a music area, and then we would pick up 1 more classroom in the early childhood, or not the early childhood, the cluster wing down. There was a classroom addition in about 1990 put on as part of, or 99, as part of the original CIP that we did that. So that's what that is. And then we would construct a parking lot with a large drop-off, very similar to Harvey Dunn with that large drop-off that we would construct through that drainage way. We'd have to work with the engineers on what that means to get underneath. Right now, there's pipes that go underneath that street. We'd have to extend that out and have that just start a little earlier. We may need to pick up some more retention. We haven't worked to that detail yet, but I think we can get that accomplished. And that's what that is, and that's about 3.9 million. Now, some of these is the new codes and we're just working through that, is they require storm shelters. We were ahead of the game on Sotomayor and Susan B. Anthony, but that's a requirement now. So the new high school will have to have that, new middle school would have to have that, and it's about like 5 square foot per student. So that's substantial, and it's even where those take 98% of the storms in America, we have to go 100% of the storms in America. So there will be a little, and that's a logarithmic loading, so it's more substantial. So now, we heard Nebraska statewide, they took that off the deal, but I talked to our building officials, and we have not done that. So. Well, you would build that storm shelter for 100% capacity. Yep. So everybody would have a place to go. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do that. So, I mean, there we did it with Jim. Well, yeah, I'll bet we won't be to that quite level when we do that, because it'll be probably internal classrooms, and you've got to do special windows, you've got to do special doors, you've got to do latches, and those sort of things. So there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. Okay. All right. Okay, the next one is central services, Head Start screening evaluation area, garage expansion, other projects at central services, there's various other ones. This would give the purchasing delivery area to the one side, it would take some of the garage out, and so there's some dominoes that would take place here. Currently, we talked about this at the Head Start screening. Right now, we have 25 staff members in a 900 square foot room. So they're sardined on top of one another. This would just get them a 6x8 cubicle into this renovation. And then some storage for that. So that's about $2.2 million to do all that. Lowell land, this is about $3 million to plan somewhere in the future for a new elementary at Lowell to replace it. That was built in 1934. So if you look at 80 to 100 year life cycle, we're going to approach that, and it's going to take some time to get that. We originally, in the last CIP, we're going to purchase some houses for a parking lot. There's no parking there either. We use a playground on snow days. And so that was there. We've been just waiting for houses to come up for sale. But there's like 3 options for which way you would go with that. And we haven't talked to Sandford or what they have, so we'll have a conversation if that's how we chose to move forward. And then Sonny Sotomayor is to maybe look at some land acquisitions for additional parking. Right now they have about 40, 44. Then if you plus another 25 on the street that Mike was gracious to let us have. But this would get us up to what our standard is in parking over time. Okay? And the next group, these are just projects that more than likely will be part of the capital and operation and maintenance part.
I'm sorry, Jeff, could I just stop you? During the break, I asked Jeff if you could just comment about the Axtell Park building, because it's not on the list anywhere, but maybe some folks would be interested to know how that building is being used and what the general status of it is.
Axtell Park's a good building there. We haven't identified any renovations for that building as part of this process. That building is housing what was at Joe Foss and some of our behavior programs. So, I mean, there's still a few classrooms, but it's being used, and the renovations that we did are working well. Now, there are some preventive maintenance things. We air conditioned that building in '91, so some of those condensing units and so forth are nearing the end of its age, and we're working through that on our preventive maintenance budget. So you'll see some this coming budget year and the following budget year to take care of that. But there really hasn't been anything identified that we need to do substantially with that building. So. Okay, the next one, I won't talk about numbers. I'll just, Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, tennis and soccer storage, little buildings. They got temporary ones now, wood ones. They've been asking for those. The one that shows on hold would be Roosevelt. I know the Parks is going through a study on pools. We're utilizing the pool house, and I know that's going to change down the road. So until we know what they're doing, I don't want to spend money there until we know what's happening there. Edison, middle school renovations, boys and girls locker room area. Patrick, some renovations for restrooms. Washington, Lincoln, and Roosevelt. They think one new science lab in reclaimed space. And then there's some tech ed spaces to reclaim. thought process is if we do a new high school, you would kind of wait and see where the population is and then determine what you need to do. So push that out a little bit. Annie Sullivan abandoned music areas and also enclosed the library. Hayward and JFK construct permanent walls. That was on their last CIP, but that would be taking those movable walls out, putting power and data in there, and we probably want to schedule that. That'd probably be somewhere either in the O&M projects or the capital outlay, because ceilings and lighting you'll do at the time. Then we need to coordinate it when smart boards go away, so we have the right backing and those sort of things. You can't really, smart boards are being mounted on those movable walls, so anytime somebody hits it, they can get out of adjustments and those sort of things. So there's some issues with those and sound quality as well. Hayward and Oscar Howe renovate library. You know they're in the center of the building. And this is to do something similar we did to JFK a few years ago to provide circulation around it so you're not walking through the bookcases and so forth. It simplifies it for everybody. Laura Wilder, parking lot, land acquisition to the south. I must be running out of voice. There's two houses and we've acquired one that came up for sale. Is to put a parking lot. There's no parking lot at Laura Wilder at this time. So then install field turf at Roosevelt, Washington, and Lincoln. That probably doesn't want to be on this bond. Improve drop-off areas at LBA, Robert Frost, Lowell, Hawthorne, Laura Wilder. Some of those are narrow residential streets. Where we've done those, it's really improved the circulation where you have a little better flow. Howard Wood improvements, reconstruct concessions on the home and visitor side. This would replace the existing ones. Try to position the windows so you're not blocking all the circulation and those are original buildings. So that's 1.3. Then improve the fencing around the grandstands. And we also have fencing around the other portion that will be needed sometime in the next 5-10 years. So that's what that is. And then the last page is projects recommended for hold that we don't, you can discuss them. But lighting on main fields, these came from various, whether it's an athletic director, principal, or whatnot. Lighting on main football fields, level band floors at Roosevelt and Washington, convert tile floors to wood at Edison and Patrick Henry, provide a new music and band classroom at Laura Wilder. If the capacity stays the same, that's almost needed. But if we get a new elementary or take care of capacity some other way, we probably don't need to do this project. Irrigation projects, we only have a handful of buildings that have full irrigation. This would irrigate, probably 70% of our sites, not some of the off one, but around the buildings and those sort of things. And then Howard Wood improvements, construct additional restroom facility on the home side. Right now, there's only about 2 events that we need that for. If we bring porta potties in, we have it solved. So it's kind of hard to justify a $1 million investment in that. So that's a list. We try to kind of put some in those buckets, but we'll see where you want them.
Yeah.
Any questions? Thank you.
Well, that brings us to an interesting position, and I'm sure our heads are swimming to some degree, and we're thinking about all the needs. And please be assured that we do have the talent around the table, coupled with the district, to be the resources to tackle these sorts of great opportunities. Are there any other just really detailed questions specific to Jeff's comments before I just take the conversation back up to a more of a macro level? Don't want to dismiss any details. Might be important. Okay. I'm wondering if we could just start maybe by asking the district back. They've come to us and have sort of said, here's our list. So they've come to us and have articulated some detailed needs that the district has in terms of facilities. I wonder if we could go back and look at think about our first meeting, think about this meeting, and maybe ask the district a question back and saying, based on the growing enrollment and those needs, what would the priorities be in terms of the facilities? Would that be a question that we could feel comfortable with taking back to them to just talk a little bit, and then we can kind of have a conversation with them based upon that, and then maybe Mike could add some more about the residential growth areas, just to refresh our memory from a couple weeks ago. And then with that, we could talk about maybe what the current zoning looks like, where the land that Sandford donated to the school district, what that currently is zoned for, and what that growth area looks like in terms of what the city, and then maybe Mr. Cotter has some comments around important issues like sewer and water and transportation and some of those, as we just open up a conversation, because for us, we're moving from, we have 4 meetings, we're at our second meeting, so by the time we meet again, we really want to have some of these thoughts put down on paper, because by our 4th meeting, we'll want to have that report in our hands and really have a fine-tooth comb to look over it. So would that be a question that we could just maybe put back if you all are okay with just hucking something back at the district to say thank you for that detail, and now let's turn it back to you to just give voice to what some of the priorities would be in terms of facilities, and take that conversation back up to the 10,000-foot level. In light of the enrollment, maybe Cooper add some comments again, taking us back to that residential growth, and then within that conversation, allow you all, when you have a question, to just raise your hand.
I might call our attention back to it came in your homework, the class size, building enrollment. The communities really made a decision that we want 24.3 students to 1 teacher, and what does that mean to building size? On the second page of that, it really outlines, if we are to stick to that goal that we've set as a community, in some ways that prioritizes when we have to have each of those buildings ready to go to meet the need. I don't know if someone from the district wants to walk through in a little more detail on that. Jeff, maybe? And that might help facilitate the discussion. Is he cursing me over there?
I was going to pass it on. Well, I think when you look at high schools and middle school, those are 2 critical components of how do you accomplish that, because we're already way over capacity. I mean, student-wise. So elementary, probably have a little bit of time. We'll give it to the big guy here.
You're doing really well. Well, let me ramble, and I don't know if I'll answer your question specifically, Vernon. So if I don't, keep challenging me to answer it. And maybe I'll go back even to what Nan said. What does the district want, and what are the priorities of the district? And so I'll be a little bit philosophical. And the priorities of the district are to meet the community needs. There, see how I just volleyed that right back to you, Nan? But here's kind of what I mean by that. And we really exist because we're part of the ecosystem that is the city of Sioux Falls. So the question really is, what is the right size for a high school? For the last few years, the right size has been 1,800 students in a high school. Now we're over that by a little bit. That's not me.
If someone's messing with the mic in the back, can we shut that off, please?
It's probably Mr. Nold. He's like that. So 1,800 has been the number at the high school for a lot of years. And I don't know that we've ever emphatically said that, but Lincoln High School was programmed for 1,800 students. Washington High School is programmed for 1,800 students. Roosevelt High School is programmed for 1,800 students. And I think if nothing else, we've become comfortable with 1,800 students. Now, over the last few years, we're getting a little uncomfortable because we're at 1,900 students at Washington, and we're at 1,900 students at Lincoln, and we're at 2,300 students at Roosevelt. So we're getting really uncomfortable there. So I think it's back to say, a time to ask the question again, what's the right number? I'm operating under the mindset that 1,800 is the right number. But I think that's a question I would ask the task force. Is that still the right number?
Well, let's start there. What are the thoughts? Theron?
That's actually where I was going. Looking back at
in the mic, please.
Looking back at the public feedback, there was just a lot of concern about what is that right size, and a lot of comments of we're too big already, and most of them I think came from the memorial discussion, from the Roosevelt discussion. If you looked at which ones, you could sort of tell where they were coming from, but nonetheless there were comments coming from Lincoln. Some input from you, Ann, but you know, sitting in the cafeteria during lunch, you know, not having a space to even sit down. I mean, so it seems like it's across there, but most importantly, even if we accept the 600, 1,000, and 1,800 as the elementary, middle, and high school right size, if we're assuming that's still the right answer, just at current enrollment levels, we need around 20 elementaries, which we have. We need over 5 middle schools, and we need over 3 high schools. So and that's at current enrollment, not the projection of over 1,000 additional, 1,143 additional students coming from the K-3 up through the system within the next 5 years. So.
What was that?
3.43. So if you take the 6,177 and divide it by 1,800, you come up with 3.43. Right. That's current. Current. And we're adding another, within 5 years, moving another over 1,000 students up to that level. Beyond that, which would then mean you would need that full fourth.
With which those numbers you just gave, even if you built another high school, think about, and you say, well, you don't have enough, and you think about the pressures on all of those other schools in each of those areas, we could give back so much that it wouldn't feel so bad at all those other schools, because I think part of the capacity issue is when you're so squished, it just feels that much worse, because they have no room to breathe, they have nowhere to escape, there's just nowhere. And so I think that has to be taken into consideration if we think, oh, maybe we don't need it. Just go back to everything you listed and the major issues everywhere. They all need breathing room.
Sharon.
So related to both what Theron and you were saying, as far as Theron brought up earlier with the word cloud, what kind of topics came up, you know, one of the things that came up was planning in the long term. And it just, how far out can we look as a group what are our parameters time-wise?
Right, are you talking, right, so if we're developing a master plan, are we looking at a 10-year plan, 15, 20?
Right.
Is that? Yeah. Sure, that's a great question. What would?
I can
your
tell you,
recommendation?
I think if you can give us enough guidance and we can all put together a 10-year plan, I think we're in great shape. I think beyond that, it would be nice, but I think it's something that as a district, we need to address at least every 5 years. We put our strategic plan together every 5 years. I think there's no reason that the facilities master plan shouldn't follow that every 5 years as well. Also, it takes us every 5 years to get real good numbers because by the time our current or our future students are born and then into our schools, there's that 5-year lag. So I think 5 years gives us a lot more solid information to look at. If I had a goal, and I'm out on a limb here now, so I'm not speaking for the board, but I'm speaking from my office, from the position of my office. I think really if we could figure out how do we address, and Theron had a really nice mathematical way of addressing it right there. How do we address the enrollment numbers that we have right now? And I think if we don't address that, I think we've missed the boat. So how do we address the enrollment issues that we have? And then if I look to a second bucket and say, how do we provide tender, loving care for the facilities we have? What do we do at Cleveland? What do we do at Whittier, et cetera, et cetera? And I don't want to just put your mind around those two facilities, but how do we provide tender, loving care to the facilities that we already have? And then maybe put a time frame to, well, we need a new high school and we need it tomorrow. That's immediate. Your choice, not mine. Middle school, how immediate is that need? Elementary, how immediate is that need? Whittier, how immediate? Cleveland, how immediate? And I think if we look at those things, I'll bet we get to 10 years pretty darn quickly. So I think if we could look at it in the buckets of what's the new facilities that we need based on enrollment, and then what's the timeline for the tender loving care or the existing facilities? What's the timeline there? And if we can kind of start wrapping our minds around those two things, I think we can get a long way in the next two meetings.
Could you refresh our memory, going back to our first meeting, on the enrollment need and how we meet the immediate need? What did that look like again on projections? Did that lean towards high school? Somebody want to take a stab at that? Do you remember?
Well, I may have the answer in our homework.
Oh,
I went to
good.
music school, so I'm not the brightest bulb in the box. But this list from the class size homework document that the district provided says to maintain the average class size and building size goals with current population and growth projections, the district would need to build an additional high school by 2022, an additional middle school by 2022, an additional additional high school by 2022, additional middle school by 2022, and additional elementary school by 2024.
And so let's back it up just a little bit. And that's 600 for elementary, 1,000 for middle school, 1,800 for high school. Is this group, can we come to consensus that that's where we want to be in terms of building size?
Why would we want to create inequity in what we have? If that's what's working for us, that's not an idea.
Can you use the mic, Deb, please?
I said I don't know why we would want to create further inequity by now saying we want different sized schools than we've traditionally had in this community, which I believe also the feedback said. You know, they like the sizes of their schools, they don't like the overcrowding. That's my feeling. I think that would just cause further need for expansion in schools that we have to maintain the equity that our community is telling us they want.
Other comments or thoughts? There's no wrong answer here, so please speak up.
My only concern, excuse me, Erin, I'll just sit in your lap. We're really friendly at this side of the table. My only concern is that when we use that 600 number, it becomes the 600 and we always go over. if we say we are capping capacity at 600, what's the actual number we want in a working school? Because the district has tried incredibly to do that, and then we look at Memorial or we look at Roosevelt, and then we go, ooh. So I understand that 600 is the goal, the 4-section school, but how do we give the district a little breathing room so that we can allow for the bumps, but still not end up with the giant growth and then we're caught? And the community said it. They said, you're way behind the power curve. And I don't want the community to feel like after we've done all this work and we've gone out and we've really done our homework, that 5 years from now, oop, we're behind the power curve. So it's the desire to be efficient, but we always seem to bump above those numbers in some of the schools, and there's good job, whoever put the capacity up.
So I'm going to ask the question, does anyone think we should be above those numbers? And again, no wrong answer, but we need to say it here and now.
I did just a brief study of best practices of schools, and it goes all the way back from 1922 when schools were larger, and then it seemed to be like the last studies were really around 2007. There was a small one, 2011. That's just what I found from digging, and it really did say high schools over the 2000 mark, it was detrimental to their education. The 1800 sure is getting close to that, but we understand that we need to maximize our buildings and resources. And then it does really fit nicely. I was challenging it because I wanted to make sure we weren't doing just what we did. And I like the equitable piece, but I wanted to see, is it based on just what we've done or is it best practice? And the research studies out of Michigan and from down south and from inner city schools really does back our district's choice. The one where we contradict ourselves really is the high school, and that number, when we bubble over, in particular, we're talking about Roosevelt, that it really has harmed our students because we've planned these beautiful buildings, but we're not using them the way that we intended. So it really does hurt our student population and their, capabilities within each of the programs that we've set up. So I can forward those studies if you want to see, and also to give our committee some validity when we're talking to community members, that it's a little wider and deeper.
So do we have consensus that those numbers for building capacity are okay?
I think the key word that you said, Vernon, is capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So that we're not building for 18, but, that we have
That we're capping.
room to grow. Mm-hmm.
Just a question. I'm just really surprised that we can get 2,300 students in Roosevelt, and they are obviously, it's a very high functioning school. They're very high functioning students, and so, how did you achieve an additional 500 students in that facility?
Hard work.
We put more than 24.3 students in a classroom. We use spaces that weren't intended to be learning spaces. And those are a lot. Those are the two things that jump to top of mind. I can tell you we're having conversations about next year and what do we do, and maybe we have a 0 hour. If you don't know what that is, if you think of a 7-period day, you have another period to the day that's a 0 hour, so that not all 2,300 students are there at any particular time. Also, the number one of our high schools, the high school with the largest enrollment at CTE is Roosevelt. So a lot of those kids are pushed out during the day as well. So we have a number of different ways that really the building administration at Roosevelt has found to cope with that enrollment.
Jeff.
I was honored to work for Dr. soon-to-be Mr. Nold for many years at Washington High. And I know the conversation's on Roosevelt right now, and rightfully so, but for many years, Washington High was right around 2,100 students. And Jamie, I don't know if you're willing or not, and this is off the top of your head, but you managed the building, you saw the hallways, I did, but from an administrator's standpoint, what was it like to, run, schedule, and that kind of thing, a building with 2,100 kids? Because we did for many years that was our capacity, and we were 300-400 kids over. So I guess I'm going to ask Mr. Nold, maybe from his standpoint, give us some thoughts.
And part of the thought process, too, that maybe doesn't always go into it because you're thinking of the classrooms, also the opportunity for the kids, because one thing that we pushed consistently was kids to be involved. So the opportunities for involvement also got diminished when you started to get to a much larger school. Now, would you notice it as much in a classroom if you walked into a classroom? Usually not, because you're going to go in there and, yeah, there'll be a couple extra students in each one of those rooms, and so you put a few more desks in there. When you really, truly noticed it was in the passing, the hallways. When you tried to have events in the gym, a lot of times you just weren't able to. When we had the events in the auditorium, we would have to definitely split the school up into multiple groups to be able to have those events in the auditorium. That really hit when we were doing things like homecoming and events like that. Planning, and it was where the request with the science rooms. So you started to run some sciences, some teachers through the lunch period, so you'd have the teacher teaching through that fourth and fifth period, which is the lunch periods, and have them take the lunches in the later afternoon or the 0 hour. We did have to run the 0 hour for quite a few years there, where we had students come in that extra early time to take classes to free up, especially in science. So you truly notice it in hallways. The passing part of it, the hallways just are not built for that size or number of students. So I feel that pain that Roosevelt has, and do realize that it is a difficulty. And then additional spots for counselors and those auxiliary type personnel that help our students. It does also impact them. So that's some of the areas we noticed it on, but the part directly with the students, the passing time, the involvement in the activities, things like that.
Vernon, I know when we were at Roosevelt for the community engagement, some of the parents said lunchtime is just horrendously stressful because you have a lot more students trying to get through that lunch line, trying to find a space, and it creates a little bit more pressure. People aren't relaxing as much, so then things get a little wonky. So, I mean, along with passing, that lunch, trying to accommodate everybody, was one of the things parents said a lot at the table that I was sitting at.
Just from a practical standpoint, if you have 2,300 kids in the school right now, you want to bring it down, whatever it is, 1,750 or 1,800, how do you practically decide which 500 kids are removed from that building to a new building? I don't know how you do that either, just to throw that out there for logistics for future.
Dr. Maher, you want to address that?
You know what I mean, Ann? Would you want to say, I'm not going to see you my senior year because I'm now going to a new school and the district's that?
Yeah.
You're the one who gets picked or I don't know.
Voluntold. One of the things that we will have to do if we build a fourth comprehensive high school, one of the things we'll have to do is redo boundaries. So necessarily, we'll have students from one school who no longer have their boundaries in that school. And I would contend probably every existing school would be impacted by that.
Were you looking for volunteers for that task force?
Yes. Here's my thought on that. We'll address that if we pass a bond issue. I don't want to address that prior to passing a bond issue, but we would do it in a similar manner to this, where we'd bring in community involvement and try to make it as painless as possible. But there will be emotion and pain involved with boundaries. And I would tell you that if we build a new school, no matter the level, elementary school, middle school, or high school, we would have to go through a similar exercise.
Do you envision that open enrollment would stay the same as it is right now, or would that be coupled with this same topic with boundaries?
I would guess, this is just me spitballing here, I would think open enrollment would be positively impacted by new facilities because we would have more space. I think it would be a positive for open enrollment. And it would help give our community choice in terms of where their students are attending.
I want to go back to that section that Jennifer read. Is there any disagreement with we've had consensus, we didn't take a vote, that we want 600, 1,000, 1,800. if we put the math to it, it's these years that those facilities have to be built. Is there any discussion around that? Concerns?
Well, I guess I would ask the educators, do they concur with Susan's research that those are the, ideal sizes of elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools?
I would. I think you're spot on, and I promise you that was not prompted. But I was sitting back here internally going, because I think that's really spot on.
Can we talk about the class size then? My gut tells me that 24 is better than 30. Yet in one of our homework assignments, someone has quoted some national expert saying that it doesn't really make any difference. Class size in terms of performance, up to a certain point. Is this, what is the reaction of the school district, again, the professionals, to this idea that the class size, in terms of performance, there's no difference between 24 or 29 or 30? To me, that's illogical.
Yeah. It is counterintuitive without a doubt. And what you're referencing is a meta-analysis, so a study of studies done by John Hattie, who's an expert in the educational field. And even though we read that data, I can tell you that even in the central office, we go, that can't be right. And as we go to the classroom, our teachers are really saying, that can't be right. But we try to stay in that number in the elementaries at least around 25, and at 27 we provide more support in the classroom, et cetera.
Jack, I was...
As I think through that, and I don't know how to dispute the research that John Hattie's put out there, but here's the part that isn't listed in there, and that is job satisfaction and how our teachers feel about being in the classroom. And I think that number, whatever it is, would be counter to the research that John Hattie is. So we try to balance what do we do for student achievement and what do we do to make sure that our teachers are working in an environment that's conducive to their longevity. So there's a balance there.
That segues exactly into what I was going to tell you anecdotally. Part of what I'm here for is I'm the husband of an educator. She teaches junior advanced placement and sophomores accelerated. English teachers have a ton of homework in composition classes. So my wife makes one assignment and gets 70 papers back to grade. So you add 5 more kids to that. Not a big deal to the public, right? It's a huge deal if she's going to be a quality teacher.
I think class size really makes a difference. And I know
Can you use the mic,
research
Diana?
is talking about, I know the research talks about that specifically, Hattie's research, but when you look at 36 kids in a class, and then that teacher's teaching 4 sections of that, or 5 sections of that, those are the numbers that really make a difference. If you're talking about 21 to 24 or something like that, but when you start getting up there in numbers, and years ago when I was in Utah, they had a lot of numbers, and so Salt Lake and all those places, 42 kids in a social studies class, and 36 kids in a science class. How do you manage good quality instruction and really give kids the attention that we expect and the engagement that we expect, with those numbers? And even when we have this number 24, when it plays out in school, they don't divide themselves evenly.
Those halves are really hard.
Some class has, 22 or 23, and then you have a class that, because of what it is, there's only 13, and then it makes another one bigger. So when you're talking 24, there's a lot of variety in that size.
I think that is important. As a fifth grade teacher, I was one of the teachers in the school that the smaller class sizes were for primary. And when you get to the upper classes, it was, I don't know if I ever was under 30 kids in my fifth grade classroom, which I do understand. It still is an important piece of it. It just would always get trumped in conversation by saying that the biggest difference is the effectiveness of the teacher, and then backing up the professional development and how you can be. But I also understand that when I would have 32 kids and I'm grading assignments.
All those assignments.
It just was very different to work with. So I think that number is important, but I totally agree that it is not, that every room is only 24 students.
And student achievement is very important, obviously, but classroom management is also something you have to consider, because my first year at Roosevelt, when it opened, I had ninth grade English, and I had one class with 35 kids, and I had 30 desks. And we got that straightened out, but just ninth graders, that many in one class in that situation, and you do work, you make it work, but consider class management also along with achievement. That's a very important quotient to all of this.
Rich, if we could get a mic down.
I think the problem that we have is that we might be expanding our scope. We really have got to have a set of critical data, which we believe the educators are telling us 24 may not be optimal, but it's what we have from a design standpoint, and that's going to drive when we need the next high school. The other point that I have a sensitivity around is if the community is saying we're behind the power curve on this, it feels late, we're going to have to really talk about when the next, school comes online. And that'll be more accelerated. So I think we need to be honest with what the data tells us right now, and assume it. We could change it as we progress, but let's just put a stake in the ground and move forward and see what that means in terms of getting the facilities online.
By the years that are mentioned here?
Yeah, or whatever we come up with. Yeah, we have to assume that that's the correct. And the other point that struck me was equality across the schools. You're going to have to bring something online, but also then normalize the Roosevelt. And even at 1900, it's above our design criteria. So what are we going to do if it goes to 2000, 2100? We're going to have to start thinking about that as a group. And really design for that. We may not do anything on it, but at least we should articulate what we believe this means to the community.
So might I just add on, there is a wish list of, these things do need to be done, but and I'm sure everybody in the city of Sioux Falls would say, yes, let's do this, but then you need to address the aspect of how is it going to get paid for, and how much is that going to affect the millage rate on the tax assessment. So we really need to focus on what can we get away with dollar-wise that would actually be palatable by the whole of voters that would come to the polling booth and be able to say, yes, let's do this, because there would be that magic number in there that you're going to turn off a lot of people once you reach a certain point. So, that does need to be a very heavy factor in what we're going to be looking at.
Agreed. Dave.
On top of what we've said so far, I think one of the things that just, it's an opportunity to fix is the fact that for X number of years, we have teachers going well over and beyond the call of duty. And I know it's not our job to say someone ought to get hazard pay. If you're teaching in a school of 2,400 kids compared to someone else at 18, that's not our job. But what I see is a real opportunity for us to say to our teachers, we really care about you. And this bond number is going to make your job a little closer to what you thought it was going to be. And it'll add a little room for growth. And so many years later, There'll be another group of folks trying to take care of not only our students, but we're really going to take care of our teachers. And there's a tangible way to say, stick around, Sioux Falls. We'd rather keep you here than see you travel to Minnesota or Denver, which is where a lot of my buddies have run off to. So I know we're emphasizing kids, but it's really obvious to me. Not really. I'm getting emotional about this, and I'm not sure why, so sorry. But the teachers that we have in our district are awesome, 99.99% awesome. And if we do this right, and if we say it right, the only question left is, what's our number that we can present that our community is going to say, we still love our students, we still love our teachers, and there's no better place to live than Sioux Falls. So that number is reachable, in my opinion.
Very good.
So that, what Thomas was saying sort of addresses what I was asking about before as far as how far ahead can we plan. And we talked about other communities and how often, I think it was Omaha or Lincoln, I can't remember, where they just pretty regularly have bonds issued. And it would be great if we could just say, this is just going to happen at regular intervals so that people are used to it and we don't have to fight and kick and scratch to make it happen for 20 years and then have to do it so big that people's hackles go up and they don't want to spend the money, even though they know that we need the things. That's part of planning ahead, and is there any way we can address that?
We've done it at the elementary level. I mean, no one ever got a vote at the elementary level. They were just built. We weren't given a voice in how big they should be or nothing. They were just built from capital outlay. You know.
So are you saying that we should not be prepared to, I'm not.
I'm just agreeing with you.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
How many in this room ever got a voice in when all these new elementary schools were built? They were just done when we were saying, please don't build so many classrooms in a building. What do you call them, Dr. Maher, for sections? You know, we've got buildings with 6 sections, and that isn't working very well for the children in that school. They're just not building any bonds with each other because as they go K to 5, there's a good chance they'll never have the same student in a classroom with them. But we didn't get a voice in that. And I think it's important to keep coming back to the people, to give them a voice, to make the case, because it is their money.
So if, then in doing that, I mean, we make the case that we are regularly going back to the community for that continued input then?
Well, if we're going to regularly grow, yes.
Right, okay.
I just think that's only fair to the people who have earned the money, you know.
So we are beyond our time, and I will stay as long as we need to, but I just want to make sure we're moving forward through this process. Is there consensus that, we have consensus on the size of buildings we want at capacity? Do we have consensus on these years, the high school by 2022, middle school by 2022, and additional elementary at 2024?
Is that the fastest you can do it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's my question too.
I mean,
Yeah, the high schools, that is the fastest we can do it, opening fall of 2022.
So opening 2022.
And middle school?
How fast can you do a middle school?
Be on that same time frame. You're trying to hit certain things within, well, I should back up. It depends if we get land, and if we do a plan reuse, we can go faster. So all those will come into play. High school, we're not looking at a plan reuse. I mean, there's going to be almost 11 months of design and work on that. Middle school, if you do a plan reuse, you can probably turn that fairly quickly. But then you got to hit the right time frame that when the bids open and when you can start breaking ground. You can't break ground in December, and you lose 4 months of that construction time. So
Then the next question becomes, if this is the consensus that we want this as soon as possible, then we're going to have to lean on Mike on where, in a general area, we have to figure out where to put each of those schools. And then the very important piece that Thomas talked about, we've got to figure out what in general terms of what we recommend to the board to do for that bond referendum, what that dollar amount or dollar range should be. Can we agree to tackle both of those two issues in our next meeting? Anything else?
I think we need to come up with something that Sharon was talking about that's going to drive our vision of this and make it positive and continuous, that we can all agree and we can drive that vision and support it when we go out and talk to the community and the media. So it needs to be something that inspires us and our students and our teachers.
That's a great point, Diane, and I think that speaks even beyond this. That goes beyond the work of this task force, but I know the district will look for raises of hands of people to go out in the community and carry a message.
One other thing I think is going to be very important, if we build middle school and the high school by 2022, and we build the elementary school by 2024, and maybe also tackle the Cleveland issue and the Whittier issue, how far out does that take us with growth projections? And it's, since we're not annexing land for the school district, does there come a point, and maybe Mike is the person to address it, does there come a point where we will plateau with our school population and we are not going to be growing that much? That the growth is going to be in Harrisburg and, Lennox and T and Tri Valley and all the surrounding districts?
The answer to that is yes. Yeah.
That it will plateau?
Yeah, because we're landlocked.
When, Mike? When?
So Dr. Maher said we should be looking at a 10-year plan. So if this does, does this mean that if we build these three and fix the other buildings, this will not only take care of our needs for the next 10 years, but we'll hit that plateau, and that this will become more of a 20 and 30-year plan?
Let me try to address that a little bit, Jack. I think you bring up a really good point, because you don't want to overbuild. I mean, these are tax dollars, so we want to be careful to build the right amount and not overbuild. When it comes to the high school, here's easy math, if you will, with me. If you remember when I said the K through 3 enrollment today is 1,144 students more than what we have room for in our high schools right now. So just think 1,100, put that in your mind. And you think of Roosevelt, 500 over capacity. So you got 1,100 plus 500, we're at 1,600. You've got Washington and Lincoln both at 1,900. So you add 2 more 100, you're at 1,800. If we leave the 3 schools we're at 1,800, and we take that 1,100, we've got 4 schools of 1,800 when our current kindergartners are 9th graders. So now we've got time to plan what's next, add on new school, and you can do a similar exercise with our middle schools right now. So I think we would be building for the enrollment that we know we have right now. I think to build more than that, it is iffy, because there will come a time when we plateau. People ask me, how big will we get? I don't know that answer. And we're not quite there yet, but I don't know that answer. And then I think we just turn to, didn't somebody here used to live in Millard?
In Omaha.
You lived in Omaha. Somebody at one of the community meetings had moved here from Millard. I talked to the Millard superintendent. He's actually a friend. And I asked him if they were still growing. And he said, no, we're maxed out. Millard is suburban Omaha, west side suburban Omaha. And they've maxed out. And he said, all of our focus right now on facilities is renovation and retrofit. So we'll get there at some point in time. That's why I think we plan for 10 years, because we know that enrollment 10 years from now. And if we look at that planning on 5-year increments, we know what that next generation of birth to actually coming here looks like. We're certainly a lot closer to capping than we were 15 years ago. So I think that's a real issue we've got to look at.
Vernon? I think the thing we also need to remember, though, is that when we looked at the renovation versus the new, dollars are pretty close. You know, our goal would, I would hope, as good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, is to keep these schools vibrant and wanting people to come to the school so that the neighborhoods keep vibrant. So we might not ever have to build a new school building, but we're going to constantly have to keep pushing our money into making these buildings the best they can be. When you look at the ages of our buildings, there'll be whole bunches of buildings that will need to be retrofitted or redesigned for what school needs to be then. So this will never stop. We won't be, okay, Jeff, you've got exactly, 2.5 years to build us a new school. It will be, how quickly can you remodel this and what is remodeling going to look like? So we might not have a long 20-year plan about building new buildings, but we are going to have a 20-year plan that says, oh my heavens, we've got all these buildings that were built in the 50s. Jeff tells me 80 years, okay, 2030, which seems a long way away, but is in a blink of an eye in a school district. We're going to have, I don't know, I figured it out, maybe 4 buildings that were built in the 50s that we're going to have to then really say, what do we do to them? So we won't be building new, but we're going to constantly be updating to keep our city a place where people want to go. So people don't want to run down to Harrisburg because they've got the newest. Well, we might not have the newest, but we do have something that will deliver the quality education that we really want to give our citizens.
So for our next meeting, then, I think we need to talk about the where, which we're going to put on Mike and Mark, and also that Mike will tell us on May 16th when we are going to cap out, as Jack talked about. He's going to look in his crystal ball before then. He's got his homework done. And then the cost. Nan, what else do we need to cover in the next meeting?
Well, those are it. I just wanted to make sure that we're on timeline with the Donovan group and honoring the process so that we don't deliberate too long and then on the back end not have enough time to really give a deliverable product to the school board that you all feel is what you would like.
I'm very satisfied with where the group is, and I think you have your next meeting lined up, and you have a lot to talk about. So no, I'm thrilled with where things are.
So next, is there anything else around the table?
May 16th.
May 16th, but Mike, go ahead.
Just to add to the discussion today, is there a magic number in terms of a bond issue that we believe has to be put out there to make sure that it passes, but also to make sure that we don't shortchange our long-term needs?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How do we determine what that magic number is?
We'll address that in the next meeting then. Anything else around this table? Because I do want to open it up to those in the audience and then our visitors or staff or school board members. Is there anyone that wants to address the group? Please come up to the microphone. Anything? Well, we really appreciate everyone's time. Those of staff, I got to tell you, the staff has been remarkable in anything we've asked for. They have delivered and delivered it timely and delivered it well. Board, you've got an incredible group of people working for you. To the people around here, thank you. I know we sent you a ton of homework. You asked for it. You did it. Great comments tonight. I feel like we made great progress tonight, and I appreciate all the work, and thank you for staying late. See you next time, May 16th.